Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, talking bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day. This is the second part to episode 6, which was all about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and this is a supplement, or more accurately, a module, which focuses on the player's handbook, the core rules to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Luckily, I have Judge BLYTHY, our resident rules lawyer, on hand in the role-playing room of Rambling to look at these rules in a bit more detail. What is it that makes the early editions of D&D tick, and if you will, talk? In this part, Judge BLYTHY will be donning his judicial wig and poking at the finer parts of the rules in the player's handbook. Daily Dwarf from Twitter has had the unenviable task of selecting 3 personal favourite AD&D scenarios from White Dwarf from the many that were published during the heyday of the magazine. I've also allowed BLYTHY to exchange his wig for a floppy, conical hat with a wide brim to talk about magic in the Games Master screen. We'll be having a spell-off. Not a spelling bee. I won't be asking him how to spell peristalsis. Instead, we'll be having a battle to the death using D&D spells. At the end of the podcast, there's a catch-up on the other Grognard Files projects that we have on the go. I'll also have a quick look at the postbag. At the first part of the episode, it's attracted a lot of comment from listeners, which has been great. Some have taken to iTunes to express their opinions, like this one from the Angry Monk in Canada. This is a wonderful, thoughtful podcast. No attempts at goofy humour or foul-mouthed jokes, just honest-to-goodness analysis of games from a bygone era. Dirk and Judge BLYTHY talk about games that I only wished to have as a younger person. I love the comfortable sound of the podcast. It makes me want to settle by the fireplace with a cup of tea and a scone. The Grognard Files is of course best listened to with a brew and a fresh packet of hobnobs. Thanks for the review, Mr. Angry Monk. I hope you've calmed down a bit. We love getting reviews on iTunes or anywhere because it reminds us that there's a point to doing all this. Okay, so the story so far. In the early days of our club, the Armchair Adventurers, we were playing RuneQuest and Traveller on rotation until our messianic friend Simon got hold of the Dungeon Master's Guide. We tried to play D&D with it for months and months in a strange, obscure scenarios that avoided dungeons, and dragons were vegetarians. Thanks to finding a loophole in the Prime Directive, a law that meant only one member of the club could own a game, BLYTHY started to run the Red Box Basic Dungeons and Dragons by claiming that it was a different game altogether, and we played during lunch times at school for a year. In 1988, we were put into a deep freeze for nearly 15 years, when we were temporarily defrosted by a psychopathic power gamer, Kevin, and we played D&D exclusively for a couple of years. Most of our experiences with D&D are based on this intense period. Recently, over the past few weeks, we've been discovering the 5th edition, and in the next part of the episode, we'll have a look at the latest incarnation of the world's first and most recognisable RPG. There's a lot to cover, so as Simon used to say as we dawdled into town on a Saturday, we have many errands today. Brisk pace, gentlemen, please. Brisk pace. Ramblers, let's get rambling.
The White Dwarf, Part 1.
Dungeons and Dragons, the White Dwarf scenarios. During its heyday, White Dwarf published many and varied scenarios for Dungeons & Dragons, once again presenting me with a bit of a headache on what choices to make. The first couple of features recognisable as scenarios were a little unusual. Alice in Dungeonland, issue 4, and Lair of the Demon Queen, issue 7, were both excerpts from Don Turnbull's Greenland's Mega Dungeon, and really didn't stand by themselves as complete adventures. Soon after, though, White Dwarf started regularly publishing scenarios that were in great settings and engaging plots and characters and fearsome monsters. This continued until the AD&D Swan Song, Getting Away from Most of It, by James Wallace in issue 93. The issue, of course, that introduced Warhammer 40,000 to the world. The king is dead. Long live the king. Choices, choices, choices. What to pick? On another day, I might have come up with different selections. In the end, as with the articles last time, I've decided to look at a few of the adventures that I remember the most fondly. But before I start rambling in earnest, here's a few honourable mentions. The Lich Way by Albi Fiore, issue 9, the first proper dungeon to appear in White Dwarf, small but perfectly formed, with a great backstory. As we'll see, though, Albi Fiore had more adventures up his sleeve. The Eagle Hunt by Marcus L. Rowland, issue 40. A hunt for stolen treasure in an assassin's guild, with added time travel if the DM's feeling brave. This features an emphasis on investigation over combat. A foretaste of the adventures to come from Marcus Rowland in Cthulhu, perhaps? The City in the Swamp by Graham Davis, issue 37. I remember this one being quite deadly, with the swamp making for an unusual and atmospheric setting, away from the usual green rolling hills of medieval high fantasy, which present some issues for the players. You're planning on wearing chainmail in a swamp? Seriously? Castle in the Wind by Vanessa Lee and Paul Stamforth, issue 76. As White Dwarf was about to head down the road of grimy dark fantasy with Warhammer, this was a breath of fresh air. High adventure and a floating castle with princes, princesses, genies, very Arabian Nights. Terror at Trollmarsh by Janet and Peter Vials, issue 74. Murder most foul in a crumbling manor house for the players to investigate. So, onwards. I finished the last part on White Dwarf articles with controversy surrounding Lou Pulsifer article. So, let's start this episode with a controversial Lou Pulsifer scenario. White Dwarf 38 featured Khazad-dûm, a scenario based on the Fellowship's trek through Moria from The Lord of the Rings. Now, Lou is very clear in explaining his intentions. This is a scenario designed to introduce new players to AD&D, rather than an attempt to accurately reproduce the famous episode from Tolkien's hefty doorstop. In this regard, I think Lou succeeds admirably. Harking back to the Dungeon Architect I covered last episode, this is a dungeon with a story that the characters have a personal stake in. It's not your standard dungeon crawl. The players have a clear, obvious goal: make it out alive and continue on the quest to defeat Sauron. Moria has been chosen to make the setup more familiar to players. Anyone with a passing knowledge of the book knows what to expect. A perilous journey through long abandoned mines, and a confrontation with a dirty big Balrog at the end. Lou simplifies some of the mechanics of AD&D for the scenario. Magic is very much played down compared with a normal game of AD&D, with Gandalf modelled more as a cleric than a magic user. More on that in a bit. I have to say though, as a gentle introduction to AD&D, it isn't very gentle. This is a tough scenario. Depending on the route taken, the party may have to deal with waits, trolls, ogres, ghouls and werewolves well before they take on the Balrog. All this with a party containing 4 second-leveled halflings. Did I say tough? Make that very tough. I ran this scenario a few times back in the day to interest new players in AD&D. The first time, the party were half dead by the time they got to the encounter at the bridge, and didn't last very long after, when the Balrog was through with them. That sound? Sauron chuckling away on his throne back in Mordor. On subsequent occasions, I toned down the monsters in initial locations. After all, the big climax for the Fellowship is to square up with the Balrog, so I wanted the players to make it there in reasonably good shape. It's a great set piece from the book, and it plays out really well in a game of AD&D. It was fun seeing the realisation dawn in the eyes of the players that they were playing a scene from the book. But because it's a game, and because the dice could go against them just at the wrong moment, this could all have a very different outcome from the story. All in all, it's a great idea for an introductory scenario from Lou Pulsifer, and very well realised. It didn't go down well with some of White Dwarf's readership though. Letters soon appeared, complaining of Gandalf's portrayal as a cleric, and accusing Lou Pulsifer of the butchery of Tolkien. I leave it to you, gentle listener, to decide whether that's a good thing or not. But anyway, talk about missing the point. Moria isn't an end in itself. Rather, Lou uses it here as a means to an end, a springboard to help new players to see how AD&D works, via a backdrop of a familiar setting. Indeed, with Peter Jackson's films now part of the cultural landscape, the world and his wife know the story of Khazad-dûm. And it remains a great scenario for introducing players to the delights of AD&D.
Judge Blythy, rules!
Okay, welcome to the ancient tabernacle of Judge Blythy. We've got the Player's Handbook under scrutiny today, and if you're playing along at home, Judge Blythy has got the first edition and I have the second edition. So Judge Blythy is our resident rules lawyer, and he applies his maxed out whiz on the game in question. And we discuss the game in general and then go really deep into particular rules. Judge Blythy will select 3 features of the game he thinks are worthy of chatterage, and then at the end of it he'll say one thing that doesn't work very well, and then towards the end I'll antagonise him a little bit. Okay, that's how it works, isn't it, Blythy?
It is, yes.
Before we get on to that, I think we need to talk about the response we got from the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it's been remarkably cool, hasn't it? Even some of our more notable listeners who normally respond to everything, they were quite happy with us dissing Traveller, talking about RuneQuest, talking about Stormbringer, Call of Cthulhu. But the reaction has been a bit different, hasn't it, for Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes, it is. It's as if it is more sacred, I think, for people. It does seem to upset people when we not have a go at D&D, but just fair criticism.
Yeah.
Seems to upset people more. Odd.
But the analogy I'd use is a bit like, when I might criticise my sister, and I say, but if you join in criticising my sister, that'd be awkward, wouldn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
it's the same thing, isn't it? So what we've effectively done is criticise people's sisters.
Yeah, well, in a sense, yeah. But I also think someone made a very good point on Twitter, where they said that they loved first edition D&D more than any other role-playing game, and they listed some of the things they loved about it, and a couple of those things were one of them was its naivety, and one of them was, I think, its kind of clunkiness or something like that. So it's a bit like people love it because it's often the first role-playing game they ever encountered.
Yeah.
In many ways, it is the first role-playing game that was, and so people have this kind of fondness and affection, and they're aware of those faults. I think people are aware of those faults, and they're aware of the faults that we pick out, and they may be aware of many of the faults we may pick out today, but they still love it.
Yeah.
They still love it because it's the first role-playing game they encountered.
Because it's like the sister, isn't it?
It's like the sister. Albeit an ugly sister.
What I think as well is that people have formed a view on it because most people will have come into contact with D&D.
Yes.
Whereas other things like Stormbringer, they may not have played.
Yes.
So that might account for it. I want to give a particular mention to the Save or Die podcast.
Oh, yes.
First of all, we need to thank them because they gave us a mention. They've drawn to us in their legions more people, because on the Save or Die podcast, they look at old stuff in detail and debate and talk about it. I don't think that'll catch on myself. I don't think there's any legs in talking about old role-playing games. I don't know.
No, I can't see any future in that.
No, but they put that in an entertaining way. Look at the old stuff, and they've given us a mention. And in particular, you, Judge Blythy.
Yes,
they've taken against.
They took against me, haven't they?
Yeah,
they did take it. They didn't like my view of Dungeon Master's Guide at all.
Yeah,
they didn't really say why, but they said I was wrong, and
Judge
I felt slightly threatened in a Texan accent.
Yeah, well, in a Texan accent, it sounded a bit.
It was like in a Western.
Yeah, or a John Grisham novel.
Yes.
Judge Blythy. Judge Blythy's wrong. Judge
Blythy's wrong. Yes, I'm not wrong, by the way. I'm right.
What I found interesting in the whole debate around the first part that we've done is some of the opinions that I had have been attributed to you. I've been wearing.
I've been the fall guy for your unpalatable opinions.
I think I'm wearing a ring of protection because I have to say that in our group, you're probably the most friendly towards D&D.
Yeah, and I have an affection for it, probably more than and a liking for it more than any of us really. Like I said, I think my the Save or Die criticism was perhaps that I kind of said the Dungeon Master's Guide was like a rambling mad book, and I still think it is, but it doesn't mean I don't like D&D. And again, today we will find it's hard not to find fault with first edition D&D because, and I think I said this last time, it's the beginnings of role playing, so it will have faults in it, won't it? Later editions of D&D have refined the game and made it better. So it's inevitable that there's going to be faults, but it doesn't mean we don't like it, and it doesn't mean we've not had fun playing it, because we have. Well,
we'll go on to that. But I mean, I have to say, and am I allowed to blow smoke up your fundament at this point?
Yeah, I'm always willing to let you do that.
Because we're men of the North. Men of the North don't normally exchange compliments.
No, we don't.
But I have to say that of all the games that you run, the D&D games that you run are the best. You're the best at running these games, and I think it's because it suits you because of the precision and detail.
Yeah. And I've always enjoyed running D&D as well. That's It's interesting you should say it because I've always enjoyed running it. I find it an easy game to run. And back in the day, I found it when we started playing D&D. Obviously, the Prime Directive prevented that for a while, but I found it quite refreshing compared to Traveller, because I ran Traveller for a long time.
Yeah.
And D&D was just felt easier. It just did feel easier as a game.
And also, you were looking for D&D surrogates. So for a time you ran Dragon Quest, you ran
because of the Prime Directive. That's right. And then when I finally got hold of D&D and was allowed to run it because of our weird rules, it was like a breath of fresh air. So yeah, we have a lot of affection for it. I have a lot of affection for D&D.
Yeah, you love it. And I think you were in search of a friend, because I had a friend in RuneQuest. And you know,
yes,
and I think it came into your own when you did it. So I do think the precision and detail in that sense that the bad guys are playing by the same rules is something that's very important to you when you do it, and it kind of details that. And the second reason is that every other dungeon master has been completely bobbins.
Yes, that's a bit of a backhanded compliment.
It
now,
is,
isn't it?
yeah.
Essentially, all the other, I'm a great dungeon master, but all the others have been rubbish.
Yeah.
I think another, and I'm gonna, you'll have to stop me doing this because I don't want to refer to other games throughout this, but it's difficult not to. I think that one of the reasons I liked D&D and liked running it was because it sits almost opposite to Traveller, and I don't mean because it's fantasy and Traveller's science fiction, but in Traveller, as we've discussed before, it always descended into madness, always descended into people shooting people all over the place, and there was no sense of what your character was or how they would behave. And D&D is very, very different. It's the opposite of that. It kind of puts you in a bracket with character class, with alignment, for example, as we discussed last time, puts you in a... So it was very different from Traveller, and so it was a kind of relief to be running a game that was very different from Traveller in the way it operated, you know. And I think that's why I enjoyed it as well.
Well, let's look at a bit more detail. What are your top 3 picks? Now, I have to say to the listening public that I've actually cast a hold person on BLYTHY at this point because he's desperate to talk about magic.
Oh, yes.
And we've got a later section that's going to look in magic in a bit more detail. So you've got that on you. So you've got to tell me, what are your top 3 picks? No magic.
Apart from magic.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, it's quite difficult with D&D because from a mechanics point of view, the mechanics are fairly crude, aren't they? But again, it's the first role-playing game. So when I've talked about mechanics and rules on the other games, you know, the other games have like novel ideas. So for example, in RuneQuest, you had strike rank, but that sits relative to D&D. So in D&D you're rolling a dice for initiative. RuneQuest has strike rank, so you like that rule because it's different from D&D. So it's almost like everything references to D&D, which makes it difficult to pick actual detailed mechanics. So what I've gone for are kind of slightly broader concepts this time.
I'll allow you to do that.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
Yeah.
Well, good job you do, because if you don't, nothing to talk about. I think the 3 things I would pick are character classes, levels, and, it's a bit left field, weapon proficiency.
We'll
come on to that. Weapon proficiency.
Okay. Well, let's start with character classes then. What is it about character classes in D&D?
Well, I always wonder what would role-playing games look like if D&D hadn't had character classes. If D&D had let you play a person with a range of skills and no character classes, what would role-playing games look like? Because when you look at role-playing games, there are role-playing games that have some sense of character class and other role-playing games that don't.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting is that when you look at role-playing games that don't ostensibly have character classes, what you find is they've built in things like professions or backgrounds that give you certain pluses and minuses on various skills. So there's always this sense of it's important to have some kind of bracket to put your character into. And what character classes do, what's great about D&D is people will quite rightly criticise first edition D&D and second edition D&D character classes because on the one hand, let's get the criticism out of the way before I get on to why I've picked it. On the one hand, there's a silliness to it. You're a magic user, you can't use anything other than a dagger, a sling or a staff. Right? Why not? Well, because it says here you can't. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's always that sense of it's a bit daft, you know. as a thief. You can't use this, you can't use that, you know. And I suppose the reason for that is this thing about game balance that D&D is kind of obsessed with. So there is that silliness to character classes, but the really exciting bit about character classes is that you can be that guy out of the film or the book. If you want to be Conan or Aragorn, you can be a fighter or a ranger, and you can be really tough and take on a horde of orcs and beat them, just like in the movies, just like in the books. If you want to be a powerful wizard who can cast lightning bolts from his fingers, you can be that in D&D. You can be that guy. If you want to be a thief that can slip into the shadows and slit someone's throat, you can be that guy in D&D.
It's exciting.
Be that guy. If you want to be a guy who doesn't use edge weapons and can turn the undead... Oh, hang on a minute. No, nobody wants to be that guy, do they? With the exception of cleric, you know. You can be those big, colourful figures from fantasy fiction and fantasy movies. And that's the great thing about character classes. It allows you to do that. All right, it might be a bit of a cliche. They might be a little bit straitjackety in what they allow you to do. But the best thing about D&D, or one of the best things, is that ability to be that larger-than-life fantasy character that it allows you to do that. You want to be a paladin. You want to be a knight in shining armour who, at kind of high levels, could take on a dragon single-handedly. You can be that guy, and that's what's great about character classes.
Yeah, I think what character classes do as well is define D&D as a setting, because it kind of fits anywhere, doesn't it, in any fantasy setting. But it kind of gives you some archetypes to work with, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, look at the cover on the front of your edition.
Yeah,
to me, it's a great cover. I mean, it's crudely painted in a lot of ways, but it's a great cover because it kind of defines the game that you're playing. Yeah. Whereas some of these are very, some of the illustrations that you see, particularly in the second edition, are like portentous, single figures taking on a horde of dragons. Well, that's not D&D, is it? D&D is everyone playing a role within a team that's done that. And I think if you accept that at face value, that you're playing a role within the team defined by your class, and a bit like the thief climbing up on top of the icon, taking the jewel out the eye, and the fighter cleaning his sword with the lizard men. That he just, if you all take that kind of take on that kind of role, if you accept that, I think it makes, for me, D&D more palatable than because what I like is the grit. I like the authenticity, and I think accepting character class is some way of accepting it as a game.
Yes.
And
yes,
getting into the spirit of the game. Yeah. If you want reality, if you want simulation, if you want something that is more of an authentic experience, go elsewhere. Yes. Because I think character classes give you, they define the setting, don't they? Yeah,
they do. And I think that's the thing. With D&D, there's no point playing D&D and going, oh, I'm happy about this. This is ridiculously unrealistic. I'm not. Well, it's not meant to. It kind of, obviously, it's trying to be sort of realistic. But what it's trying to do is it's not trying to give you a feel for what it would be like to swing a sword round and hit someone. What it's trying to give you is a feeling of what it would be like to be those characters from heroic fantasy fiction.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is that we have spent many, when it comes to character classes, I've put forward the argument to you that D&D is compromised by its desire to be balanced.
Yes.
However, if you accept that and just say, well, it's part of the game. It's a game.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the game, and also, I think it's that thing of you. It's easy to accept once you accept that it is not trying to create a pseudo-medieval reality with magic. What it's trying to do is create a reality based on fiction, movies, that kind of thing. It's trying to create that kind of reality, whereas other games are trying to say, imagine a fantasy world, what would it really be like, and what would happen if this happened to you or that happened to you? Yeah.
What about bards? They're conspicuous by...
I don't like bards. Well, second edition bards are okay because they're a kind of subclass of rogue, and that they work very nicely in second edition. But first edition, it's like he's had a moment of madness at the back. He's got these bards, and you think, well, you've got to have a strength of 15, and you've got to have high scores, and then you've got to start. I think you've got to start off as a fighter, then switch classes to a thief between 5th and 6th level, then switch classes again to a magic user, and you think, what's this? Just to play loot? Really? It just seems it's insane. Well, I mean, some of the character classes are a bit insane.
Yeah.
I'm not. Don't get me wrong. Monks. I always had a problem with monks. Monks, clerics, and bards. And clerics are boring. We know that. It's a fact. They're boring. They can turn undead. They never make the roll, and then the magic user in the fight have to mop up the cleric. Step aside, some zombies. I can turn undead, or failed a roll. The magic user kills them with a fireball. That's generally how D&D works.
Well, when it comes to bard, you always make this point that in the first edition, the strength is 15 or something. So
in first edition, one of the funny things about first edition is you've got these kind of weirdly high statistic requirements for certain classes. So I think like a paladin, you have to have a charisma of 18, right. and it leads you down a certain road, which is a bit problematic, I think, because people want to play these character classes, but if you just roll 3d6, a raw 3d6, you're probably never going to, or very rarely going to get the stats you need. So what people do is point systems and rolling, best of 6d6 or best of 4d6 and all this kind of thing. Redistribution of stats and all that. We've been down that road. But one of the problems with that is you then get into this min-max kind of culture, don't you?
Yeah.
But, said that, I think first edition D&D and second edition D&D kind of cultivate that. Some of the stat bonuses are ridiculous. So, for example, looking at the second edition here, and hit probability, you only get +1 hit probability if you've got a strength of 17. And you only get a damage adjustment, strength 16. Now, come on. A guy with a strength of 14 or 15 is pretty strong. If he hits you, you're going to feel it more than a guy with a strength of 9. But the guy with a strength of 15 and the guy with a strength of 9 have exactly the same to hit and damage bonuses, i.e. none. It just seems a bit ridiculous. So it kind of pushes you a bit down that road. So not only is it this idea that if you want to play a ranger, if you want to play a paladin or a monk, you've got to have certain stats that are very, very good. It also pushes you down the road of thinking, well, I really need to up the stats. If I'm going to be a fighter, I really want the super strength of 18 and then a D100. A bit like magic users as well. If you're a magic user, there's no point being one unless, I think, in my view anyway, unless you've got an intelligence of about 16.
I seem to remember you and Kevin having endless debates about super strength and the application of super strength.
Yeah, it just gets out of hand. It just gets really, really silly, where if people who are playing fighters all want a strength of 18 because it just gives you the edge. It gives you a lot more damage, and then you just get these people with a strength of 18. What's the point of that? It just seems a bit silly. So it's not just. I think it goes back to something you said in the last podcast about it attracting power gamers. Well, does it attract power gamers, or does the game? I think the game pushes you a bit down that road.
Yeah.
It does push you down that road. So again, it's like, say, going back to being a magic user. If you employ the rule about certain spells at certain levels, you need a certain degree, a certain intellect score. Well, there's no point being a magic user with an intelligence of 14, because if you manage to survive to sort of 10th level, you suddenly find you can't use the high level spells because you haven't got the intelligence. So the game pushes you into, well, I'm not going to be a magic user unless I've got an intelligence of 18.
Yeah.
So it's like it pushes you into power gaming a little bit. We're off the point of character classes now, but I think there's an element of that to it.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned levels, so that's the next thing that you.
Levels. Again, a bit like character classes. It's that interesting thing, isn't it? That again, what would role playing be if D&D had levels? That idea.
Yeah.
There's that idea, isn't it, of character progression? Which isn't really necessary. If this is the first role playing game, You don't need character progression, do you? You could say this is a game where you play a character and you just do stuff. No, So, but it brings in the idea of character progression.
Yeah, I think it serves a couple of purposes, doesn't it? Levels. On the one hand, as you say, it's like character motivation. It gives you a need, a drive to build your character up through experiences. I think it's also good for the dungeon masters because it gives you a kind of an idea of how to pitch an adventure.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's true.
But what I'd say is, for me personally, I'd like to go back to real old school because I think the game was originally conceived that you get a group of friends together, you play for a while, get up to 10th level, and then hit the reset button and go back to first level. Because I think once you get beyond 10th level, every game I've had where it's been above that has been daft.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think it's one thing to be 8th, 9th level and enjoy being powerful, and being a powerful wizard or a powerful fighter, and being, as I said earlier, being that guy in the book or the film that can kind of tackle lots of monsters. That's good fun. But once you get to 15th, 20th level, I think, was it the D&D, basic D&D master set or companion set went up to like 25th level or something, and then it starts becoming like a superhero game. For me, it's demigod. It's silly. It stops being like fantasy and starts being like a superhero game. So I agree. I think it's good to build a character up and have a sense of they're powerful, but it can go too far.
Yeah. Next up, you want to talk about is weapon proficiencies. So that seems very specific.
It's very specific.
It's very hard to
it's specific, and it sounds, I think, by comparison to the other two, it's dull, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think weapon proficiency, particularly in first edition, because in second edition they introduce skills, don't they?
Yeah.
They introduce proficiencies in skills. But if you look at first edition, weapon proficiencies is a fascinating glimpse, I think. It's like a little kernel, a little seed of what's to come in D&D and role-playing generally, because basically weapon proficiency says if you're a fighter, you are proficient in, I think, something like 4 weapons, and if you pick up a weapon you're not proficient in, you get -2 or something like that. And then I think for magic users, it's something like proficient in 2 weapons. If you pick up a weapon you can't use, you're -5. And what's fascinating about it is it sort of starts. It doesn't answer this question in first edition, but it's the beginnings of the answer to that question of, I'm playing a magic user, there's a great sword on the floor, why can't I pick it up and use it? And of course in first edition it's, well, you just can't, your character class says you can't, so don't. What weapon efficiency does is it gives a dungeon master, a games master, the ability to say, well, you can pick up the great sword as a magic user, but you're never going to be proficient in it and you're at -5. So your to-hit roll's a bit rubbish anyway, but you're also at -5. And it kind of pushes the game in that direction of saying, all right, character classes and professions and background, we're not going to say you can't use something, but if you do use it, you're going to be penalised.
When it comes to combat, and this is a little bit of flavour in combat, isn't it? When it comes to combat, I think D&D, it's really boring.
It can be, because it can just be rolling d20s. And hit, miss, damage.
When we played those games in the noughties, and we spent the whole afternoon rolling a handful of dice, and just backwards and forwards doing it. I think this is a bit that, it can go on forever.
Yeah, it can do. Chipping away at people, rolling a d20.
And then all the maths, calculating a THACO, and this is where I think it loses it, and this is where the thing is where I've been able to reconcile D&D is by just seeing it as a game, with numbers and subtractions and additions.
But that's where magic makes it. Oh, sorry,
but you're not allowed to. You've got
can't mention that.
Yeah.
But what makes a fight interesting is, of course, the magic user, which is the best character class.
we'll come on to that. And what's the element of the rule that you don't like?
Well, the element that I don't like, I mean, I was tempted by as I said earlier, the statistic bonuses, because I think they're stupidly high. You know, but we've mentioned that. I think the one thing I've always struggled with in first edition D&D, and it's the same in second edition D&D, is saving throws. They just seem like random numbers.
Yeah.
You know, admittedly the saving throws aren't given in first edition Player's Handbook, but I think we can still talk about them because I think they are in second edition, if I'm right.
Yeah, I think the thing with saving rolls as well, they're an arbitrary number, but they're also for arbitrary things. Bending bars.
Yeah.
Bending bars.
Bending bars.
Well, does it have to be a bar? Define a bar. What would be a bar in that case?
Yeah.
What is
When's
a bar?
Not a bar? At what point do I say, is this a bar? Can I bend it?
Yeah.
No, it's not a bar. It's a girder. What can I try? No, it's a girder, not a bar. But going... Let's just give some examples, right? So, priest, cleric. Call them priests in second edition. Don't matter. Don't make them more interesting. Doesn't. Priest. Paralysation, poison or death magic, 10. First level cleric, 10 or more on a d20. So if someone casts some death magic at you, it's a 10 or more to save against it. Okay. Warriors, fighters, it's 14. Wizards, it's 14. Rogues, thieves, it's 13. Why? Why those numbers? Why those numbers? There is no rhyme or reason to those numbers. It should really be, my gut instinct, it should be some kind of roll against a relevant statistic, shouldn't it?
Yeah, so
but it's not. It's just a made-up number.
Or it relates to an attribute.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can get some attribute bonuses. I think get poison, you get constitution can kind of help.
Right.
But the target number is still just arbitrary. Why is a cleric better at resisting poison than a thief or a wizard? Why? I don't get. What, the help of the gods? But that's not the case, because on other saving throws they're worse. You know, breath weapon, 16 breath weapon 16 or more. Breath weapon.
Well, the gods can be fickle.
Well, they can, but
they can save against certain things, but not others. Pretty
weird. You know, it just seems like a load of random numbers, and I think it comes back to that thing you've pointed out, the game balance thing. It's obsessed with balance. So what it's done is they've come up with these saving throws that think, okay, all right, clerics are better at resisting poison, but magic users are better at resisting something else. And it's all kind of nicely balanced. Well, it is, but it don't make any sense whatsoever. And it's always kind of rubbed me up the wrong way when you're sitting around the table and your character class gets some lousy target figure for the saving throws, and you think, why is he no good at this? There's no reason.
Before we move on and end this section, I want to go back to the bard. Right?
Do we have to?
What? No, Doc Griffith. No. Doc Griffith.
Yeah.
And he's a doctor. He's a doctor of role playing. So
is he?
Yeah. And I've never known anyone play a bard.
No, I can believe that.
I've played a bard.
You played a bard in second edition.
Well, I did. But I still played a bard.
Yeah, the bard in second editions is good.
I like the bard.
Nothing wrong with it.
I like the bard in second edition.
I'm not having a go. I don't have a problem with the second edition bard. It's first edition bard I have a problem with.
Because in the second edition, the bard in second edition, is a dabbler.
Yes.
I like the idea.
I think I've played a bard as well in second edition. Nothing wrong with it.
But the trouble with me playing a bard in one of Kevin's games is that I wasn't allowed to do anything.
No, you weren't, were you?
No. I wanted to tumble off a roof.
Off a roof. Yeah, you did, didn't you?
Yeah. I think you'll find that the manufacture of these tiles mean that you can't tumble. Well, what's the point?
It's like in the room then. It's just like you speak like that. Uncanny that.
But I couldn't tumble. I was barred.
You were barred.
Barred from being a bard.
Your bard was constantly barred, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't have a problem with second edition bards. They're kind of logical. They fit in. They're quite an interesting character class. It's just first edition. It's insane. What is he talking about? What bard is this he's talking about? It has to be change character classes 3 times and have all these ludicrously high stats? Beyond me. Just beyond me. I don't know. I don't understand it.
Okay. Well, let's close the lid on the player's handbook.
Okay.
We're going to head now to a blackened heath. Where shall we two meet again? To talk magic.
Oh, yeah.
The White Dwarf, Part 2.
Anyway, having staggered out of Moria into Dimrill Dale, blooded and blinking in the sunlight, where should your players go next? Hopefully, they are now sold on AD&D, so it's time to hit them with some full-strength swords and sorcery. What better than the Halls of Tism Thane from issue 18? Seriously, is there a better scenario title for an AD&D adventure anywhere? Albi Fiore was channeling the spirit of Robert E. Howard here, and not just with the title. The whole scenario has a rich, decadent atmosphere to it, reminiscent of the Conan stories. Once again, the scenario features a strong, interesting plot as the characters are drawn into a fraternal feud. 3 brothers plot both with and against each other, resulting in grisly death and the unwitting unleashing of a fearsome guardian, driven mad with grief and regret. Just the sort of drama the player should relish becoming involved in. There are a number of subplots, too, that the Dungeon Master can have fun with. A missing merchant's daughter, the reports of night things terrorizing nearby villages. The setting is evocative and atmospheric. The halls themselves are located on an island in a lake inside an old volcanic crater. And once inside, the mood of dissolution and turpitude is maintained. A once lavish complex slowly fades and crumbles. Black lotus and hookah pipes still litter the guest quarters, while down the hall is an abandoned harem. This is a very open scenario, by which I mean there's no railroading of the characters, either in terms of the locations or the story itself. There are many potential paths through the halls, and 1 or 2 exceptions, the rooms are intelligently populated. Albi Fiore has designed an ecological dungeon, as per the dungeon architect. There's a reason why the monsters and the NPCs are where they are, which adds to the cohesive feel of the scenario and enhances the plot. There are some standout locations within the complex. The Hall of Mirrors is a particular highlight and gives the Dungeon Master scope to extend the adventure way beyond what is written on the page. There are so many ways that the players can tackle the adventure narrative. I think it rewards role-playing over full frontal assault and all-out combat. The motivations of the main NPCs mean that they're unlikely to attack the party on sight, so the Dungeon Master has ample opportunity to engage in some Robert E. Howard-inspired grandstanding and plot development. Again, with some thought, there are many hooks and ample scope to allow the Dungeon Master to extend this to a wider campaign. When I ran it for the first time, my players and I enjoyed it hugely. The immersive plot really drew the characters in, and one of the NPCs became a recurring feature of the campaign. Sometimes an ally of the characters, at other times an antagonist. I ran it a number of years later at university for a different group of players. This time as a one-off. I made one modification. The one thing I felt that scenario was missing was a barnstorming climax to round it off. It needed an apocalyptic ending in the style of some universal horror movies like The Bride of Frankenstein, with the complete destruction of the halls. The last act was a frantic attempt by the PCs to try and escape while the complex collapsed around their ears. As I remember, they did make it out. Just. As I noted above, the Lich Way in issue 9 was the first scenario proper to appear in White Dwarf, but I think it was with the Halls of Tizun Thane that the magazine realised its potential in being able to push the quality, wonderfully written adventures that were easily equal of TSR's output at the time. From this point on, I don't think it ever looked back.
The Games Master screen.
Welcome again, Blythy.
Hello, Dirk.
Okay, we've turned away from the room of the RPG rambling and taken to the blackened heath under a blighted tree to talk about magic. Now this section, the Games Master screen, usually involves rolling on a random generator and talking bobbins about a supplement or a feature to illustrate the game under discussion, and today is no exception. I'm going to erect this barrier in front of us. I've used the 5th edition screen. It's a good one, isn't it?
Very nice.
It's the modern thing of having a landscape.
Yes, it's true, that, isn't it? Modern games. Yeah, the old ones were portrait, weren't they?
Yeah.
And didn't quite work. It's a bit too high, weren't they?
But they're good, aren't they? It's good, and it spreads out, and it kind of puts a useful barrier between us. I like the picture on that side as well. So, okay. But we're equals in this game. And before we get on to all that palaver, okay, before we get on to the duel of magic, I've been holding you back. I've been saying...
You've been holding,
I've been saying you can't talk about magic, but I'm going to give you a licence now. What is it about Dungeons and Dragons and magic that you like so much?
Well, I think that magic is where Dungeons and Dragons comes into its own. I really do, because I think the spells. I don't think I've ever played a game where the spells the wizards have, perhaps not the clerics, are so kind of fantastic. And I also like the magic system for D&D. It's kind of simple. It's nice and simple, because this idea that you just remember spells and when you've cast them they leave your head seems on the face of it a little bit naive or a bit daft. But I think the other way of looking at it, it's a bit like magic. It's like magical. A lot of other games have point systems, don't they? So a lot of, it costs you so much to cast a spell and this, that and the other. Whereas in D&D, if you've got a powerful spell, it's there in your head and you can cast it. You don't have to worry about points. Example, I suppose, and forgive me for talking RuneQuest, but a bit like RuneQuest, you've got a powerful spell in RuneQuest, it's going to cost you, say, healing 6. That's a powerful spell. You can reattach a limb, something like that, can't you?
Yeah.
But it's going to cost you 6 power points. So if you want to cast a powerful spell, you can only cast maybe a few in a game because you're going to deplete your power points. Whereas in D&D, if you've got a powerful spell, you don't have to worry about points. It's in your head and you can cast it. Once it's gone, but it's there to be used. You don't have to make those kind of decisions about how to divvy up the points and whether it's worth using the points for a powerful spell. It's there to be used, and that's what makes wizards and some to an extent clerics kind of powerful spellcasters in the game, and that's what I like about it. It's nice and simple, and the spells, as we'll go on to see, are a lot of fun. I think the spells are a lot of fun, and you can do kind of innovative things with them, and I like that.
Yeah, I like it as well. I think we've commented before, the difficulty with magic in role-playing games is very often they just become mechanical, don't they? The magic is kind of taken out of them.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, some D&D spells are mechanical. So things like Fireball and Lightning Bolt, it's a kind of roll lots of dice, do lots of damage, that kind of thing. So there is a mechanical element to some spells, but there's I would say a good 50% of the spells, if not slightly more, have that kind of thing where you can be innovative with them, you can be creative with them, you can use them in different situations in different ways, and that really for me is what makes the game. As you know, I struggle in D&D if I'm not a magic user, because I just like that idea. It makes the game what it is for me. It's the real exciting, interesting bit of the game. I mean, again, magic user spells, really, cleric spells. You know, I used to think sleep was a cleric spell, but then I realised it was just a cleric spell, send him into sleep, because they're so boring. Having said that, I've probably been a bit unfair to clerics. All the clerics out there, I know I've upset you. But I think the problem with clerical spells, because we're going to go on to talk about magic user spells, aren't we?
Yeah.
I think the problem with clerical spells is that you get put under a bit of pressure as a cleric to pick dull but useful spells. So some of the cleric spells are pretty good. There are some good spells there, but you get put under pressure, I think, from other players.
To be utilitarian.
Yes, to have the healing spells, cure poison, cure disease, that kind of stuff. And the kind of it's a bit dull, it's a bit boring. Whereas the magic user, because he doesn't have those kind of spells, the magic user isn't under that kind of pressure. There, I mean, there's a bit of pressure, I suppose, to have a fireball and that kind of thing, but they've a little more flexibility. Whereas the cleric, I think, you get that problem, don't you? I mean, I think we once played a game where one player berated another player because their cleric hadn't picked enough healing spells. And that's the thing, isn't it? You think, oh well, I've got to just pick these dull spells for everyone else's benefit.
One of the things that I think the magic contributes towards is that feeling that you mentioned previously, and that thing about being that guy. When I created a character in one of your games, Izia Voon, who I've mentioned previously, he was a magic user, a wizard who was kind of had a scientific approach to magic, and we had little side plots, didn't we, where he would go looking for components of spells, and that added a lot of flavour and interest, and he felt like a rounded character. But as well, I felt like a powerful wizard. I felt when I was playing that character that I had the power of magic behind me.
Yes.
And I don't think I've ever felt that way in any other game.
No, I think you're right. Any other, I mean, there may be games out there that, and I'm sure people will let us know that do that. But from our experience, that we've never played a role-playing game that really let you feel like a wizard.
Yeah.
D&D is the one that makes you feel like you have spells that are powerful, and also there's a lot of colour to them as well. Like you say, the material components bit. Yeah. It's kind of interesting, you need a pinch of salt and a grasshopper's leg or something like that. It just adds that little bit of colour to the whole thing, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think for the person who's playing the magic user, it's a different game experience. So you just said that you prefer playing the magic user and you don't like playing any others. And I think it's because you by nature are a tactical player, aren't you? So you like the idea of tactics, and it becomes for the magic user a game of when to expend your resources.
Yes. Yeah.
What is the point to make this particular spell fit with this situation to its maximum thing?
Yeah.
So all the time you can see the person who's playing the magic user is making those kind of calculations. Infuriatingly, they usually do that with the nose in the player's handbook as well, don't they? So
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes.
Yes, how's the duration of this spell? Yeah. No, you're right, because it feels like that as a magic user, that you're quite a weak character class. It's quite weak. You don't have many hit points. You're no good in a fight. All you've got are these spells, which are quite powerful. And they're the spells that are going to help you survive. So it's like a kind of game of wits, almost, with a games master, isn't it? Almost that sense of like, he's going to throw things at me. All I've got are these spells. How can I employ them in such a way to maximum benefit?
And the tactical dungeon master will put things in place to kind of force the magic user to expend their spells before the big guy arrives on the scene.
You're in a room and you've got your fireball spell and you think you might want to save that for the later on, but if you put it in a tight spot, you're going to have to use it. And I suppose it's a bit like we were saying earlier about that team game thing, in that protecting the magic user. So the magic user isn't in a position where he has to use that to survive. He's in a position where he's safe and he can use that for the benefit of the party later on. There's an element of that, isn't there?
And who else is going to carry the torch?
Who else is going to carry the torch? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, everyone else has got a sword and shield. He's the only one with a free hand.
Yeah. So, your favourite character class is a glorified candelabra. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. But at least he can use edge weapons.
Okay. Are you ready for this then? We're going to go into this duel, a battle of wits, a battle of minds. But before we do that, I think we need to send in the high horses.
The high horses, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so today's Games Master screen is brought to you by the D10. The D10, okay? So what I'd like you to do is roll for the height of your horse.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know how to measure this.
Is this in hands, hooves,
hands,
feet?
Hands, feet.
I don't know. How do I measure a horse?
Whoopsie daisy.
Yeah.
Let's do it in feet. So how many feet? Okay. You've got 10.
10?
10.
That is that's a high horse, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a high horse. You're going to need a ladder for that one. Okay. I've got a 1, typically.
That's a short horse, isn't it?
Short horse. It's not the first time I've been called a short horse. But it's not a horse, it's a dwarven pony.
It's a dwarven. You got your dwarven pony at last.
Yeah.
You always wanted one. Now you've got one. Now I've got a dwarven giraffe. An elvish giraffe. You've got a dwarven pony.
The boule will just go under your legs, won't it? And just go like a heat-seeking missile to me.
And eat your pony.
Okay. Right, so we've got a high horse and a short horse. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Now, are you using your spell book or have you got them in your slots?
I've memorised them.
You got them?
I've got them memorised, but you do realise when I've discussed the spell, I will not be able to remember anything about it. So don't go back because it will have left me memory completely.
So it's one use only.
It's one use only until I've had a good night's sleep.
Okay, so let's roll for initiative. Okay.
Oh.
I've got 3.
And I've got 2. Oh, 2.
2.
Oh, dear me. Yeah.
That means I go first.
Okay.
I'm going to cast my favourite spell, Magic Mouth.
Magic Mouth.
Okay.
Why have you picked that?
Well, I pick this one because I like spells versatility, and I think you should never leave home without Magic Mouth. Well, you should never leave your house without setting a Magic Mouth up for a starter, because as a wizard, you should have them on every door.
Yes. Yeah.
The Magic Mouth is great because it kind of brings in ventriloquism and distraction all in one. So if you stick a Magic Mouth on the end of a thieves' arrow, you can have somebody talking behind the bushes and send the orcs in one direction.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah.
And you can have them set up on all your equipment so that if anybody tries taking them, you can. I always have one on the back of my head. Why wouldn't you?
Just like your thing about having an eye on the end of your finger.
It is
so
like
you can look round corners.
Yeah. That was always my superpower, to have an eye on the end of my finger. Well, with a mouth
on the end of your finger.
A mouth on the end of your finger.
Yes.
Tell me what's on the other side. Yeah.
It can't see.
It can't see, can it? But it can alert, can't you? If somebody's doing a backstab on you.
Yeah.
You can have a mouth on your hat, couldn't you?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it can. It see? Can it?
Well, you can set
like
a
alarm,
radius.
Isn't it?
It's like an alarm. Yeah,
it's like an alarm. It can't tell you what it sees, but if it sees, someone attacking you. Yeah.
Has Avon always had one on his hat?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
So nobody could ever get him from behind.
Yeah.
It was difficult when he was walking down the street and his Magic Mouth was talking to him.
Interesting choice. And I suspect, and it's worth mentioning, I think, at this point, I suspect you've gone down the same road as me in that I've ignored, and this isn't a spoiler about the 3 spells, but I've ignored the fireballs and lightning bolts and magic missiles.
Yeah, they're boring, aren't they?
Well,
they're just a part of the artillery.
Exactly. They're just part of the artillery. And whilst, you'd be a poor magic user if you had access to fireball and didn't remember it. That would be bad form, I think, because there is an expectation you're going to be able to blow something away at some point.
Yeah.
But you're right, they're a bit boring to talk about, because they're just like, bam, lots of dice, lots of damage. That's it.
The other good thing about Magic Mouth is trying to fit it within 25 words what you want it to say.
Oh, right.
So it's like Twitter, isn't it?
Yes, it's like a magical Twitter.
I got all my Twitter practice.
Gary Guy gets us there first.
Magic Mouth. And to do that, all you need is a small comb of honey. Small comb of honey.
Is that all you need?
Okay. Yeah. Are you going to blast me with yours?
Yes. My first choice is, my first choice is enlarge.
Is it?
Or is it? Now, good thing about enlarge is it's a reversible spell.
Yeah.
So, actually, my choice is shrink.
Right.
I think shrink is a really clever first level. I think it's a first level spell.
It is a first
level spell. So it's not enlarge. Enlarge, I don't want to talk about it. Enlarge is a bit of a strange one. A bit, not as useful. But shrink.
It's good for riding high horses.
It's good for riding a high horse. You can get a high horse out of it. But I don't think we need to do that. I think I've got a high horse already. And I should soon be climbing on it. But shrink is a useful spell because you can. There's sort of a multitude of things you can cast it on. Inanimate objects.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking, and I'll make this point here. I'm not thinking that it's much use for casting on an opponent because they get a saving throw. And I have a dim view of spells that get a saving throw because I think there's a lot of spells in the spell book where it seems powerful. So flesh to stone, that kind of thing. You know, I can turn the dragon to stone. You won't. It'll get a saving throw and it'll have magic resistance and it won't work. So you may as well not bother having it. So when I pick spells, I kind of avoid the ones that I have a bit of doubt over whether they'll work. I think it's good to pick spells that you know will work. And shrink will work on inanimate objects. So, big sword, suddenly he's got a cocktail stick. Guy comes at you with a great sword, suddenly he's got a dagger. Think about shrinking a fighter's breastplate so he can't breathe. Think about shrinking the floorboards under the feet so they fall through the floor. Find a door that's locked that no one can open. Shrink the door, pops off its hinges. Multitude of uses. I've had a great fun with the shrink spell over the years. I do think it's a great spell. Seems really, on the list of spells you think it's boring, isn't it? But it's not. It's got a lot of kind of potential, you know.
Dear listener, I'm going to give the first round to Judge BLYTHY.
Very kind of you.
Let's roll for initiative.
Okay.
8.
Difficult. 5. I'm doing very well here with the initiative.
I'm going to go for it.
Go on.
Now, you'll say this is typical of me. Are you ready?
Go on. I know what's coming, I think, but go on.
Leomund's Tiny Hut.
Leomund's Tiny Hut.
Yes.
Why have you picked that?
Well, let me just get over the disappointment that it's not like Shimrod's
Sounds good.
Tiny Hut in Lyonesse, because Shimrod used to have a hut, didn't he, that he used to take on his travels.
Yes, yeah.
And he would enlarge it and then spend the night in his hut.
Yes.
It's not quite like that. It's a hemisphere that goes over the top of you and does protection, doesn't it? Over the night. Let's face it, being a magic user is all about having a good rest, isn't it? It's having a sleep. And you don't want to have your sleep interrupted because, it means that your powers are going to be diminished otherwise. So I think you always have to have a Leomund's Tiny Hut. The other thing is that I think, let's face it, too often these spells are all about the pyrotechnics. When it comes to magic, really, they should follow Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because if you were devising magic, you'd sort out the stuff that was going to make things easier first, wouldn't you? Like doing the washing up and so on. And just having somewhere to sleep at night, isn't it?
Yes,
like
that's very true, actually.
Tent.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go for Leomund's Tiny Hut because I like the Vancian sound of it, even though it's quite disappointing.
It's not a hut.
It's not a hut. In my imagination, it's a hut.
Yeah, it can be a hut. You could say it's a hut. It looks like a hut. There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
No.
It's quite a good, and I like the idea that you could be safe in your hut while the rest of the party's butchered in the night by wolves.
Yes.
Wake up in the morning, fully refreshed, with all your spells memorised and everybody's dead. Always funny as a magic. That's one of the funny sides of being a magic user. Everyone's being killed, I'll turn invisible. Or I'll fly up to the ceiling. It's a bother.
It also means you don't have to bother with all that thing of, right, who's on watch? Are you on watch first? Well,
Yeah,
I'll
they
do
do.
the first watch.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. You don't.
No,
You're all right.
I'm in my hut.
You're in my tiny hut. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Goes with my tiny
Watch out for the wolves.
Yeah. Goes with my tiny horse. Yeah.
Tiny horse in a tiny hut. Yeah.
There's a tiny horse in a tiny hut. Right, go on, yours. Move.
Okay, my next choice is Phantasmal Force.
Phantasmal Force.
Phantasmal Force. Now, you'll notice at this point, and I think you're the same. We've not gone for those really high level spells, have we? Well?
Yeah. Well, you get very acquainted with those low level ones, don't you? Because you've got to make them work, haven't you?
You've got to make them work. Well, that's it, you see, and I think they're kind of accessible. It's a bit too easy to sort of say, oh, well, I've a great power word kill or wish or time stop or teleport are great spells. Well, they are, but you've got to be really high level, so they're not really, for me, they're not really a consideration.
No.
But I like Phantasmal Force for similar reasons that I like the enlarge or shrink spell. In that, it has a multitude of uses. Because you can create an illusion, basically. You can create an illusion, and you can create an illusion that can do damage as well. So you can actually kill people with an illusion.
So like Stannis Baratheon.
It's kind of illusory things, I mean, in Dungeon Master's Guide, it sort of mentions an illusory fireball. So, you could cast a real fireball and then next round cast an illusion one. You've got 2 fireballs, haven't you? And it does damage. It can kill people. It does mention that. If you do an illusory pit with spikes in and they fall in, they'll take damage. So it's kind of... But it's not just kind of a heavy artillery spell. You can do anything with it, can't you?
Yeah.
It's creating an illusion.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about it, going back to the saving throw thing, is that in Player's Handbook, it talks about people who try and disbelieve it get a saving throw. But if you cast it properly, if you cast it when they're not looking, they won't try and disbelieve it, because you wouldn't, would you? You wouldn't try and disbelieve a pit with spikes in.
No.
Because why would you? It's totally... It's kind of nonsense for the games master to say, oh, everyone's going to try and disbelieve this. Well, you wouldn't. Well, you don't go around trying to disbelieve things.
Oh, I do.
So, some things you do, yeah. But unfortunately, they are real. So whilst it does have a saving throw element to it, the saving throw is unlikely that they're going to do that,
Yeah.
So I like it, because you can do lots with it, You can do something quite... deadly. You can do something quite deadly with it, or you can just do something a little bit tricksy with it,
See, that one would have been a good one to put up against Magic Mouth, because you could have everything you said there is Magic Mouth is more a specific version, isn't it, of doing that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yes.
That kind of versatile use of...
And that's what I was saying earlier at the beginning. That's the beauty of some of the spells, that they're beautifully kind of vague.
Yes.
And there's something about that, you can create an illusion. You can create an illusion of some description within certain parameters, how long it lasts and how big it is and all that kind of stuff.
I suppose it depends if you've got a cooperative DM, though, doesn't
well,
it?
You do, yeah, you do need that. But again, I suppose, I don't know, you can get that problem with the spells, that you get games masters who are deliberately awkward and say, oh no, everyone's going to try and disbelieve this.
Yeah.
Because then you think, oh, it's not quite realistic to do that. You do get that problem, but generally these are spells that you can play around with. You can have them in your magic user's back pocket, can't you? And at some point in the game think, do you know what would be good here? Just to create an illusion, even if it's an illusion that allows the party to escape. I mean, that's sometimes the best thing about some of these spells. It allows the party, when they're in trouble, you're in trouble, you can cast some, if you're in trouble, you can cast an illusory crevasse across the room that the opponents kind of stop at and think there's a huge gaping canyon between you and them. It gives you that space and that moment where you think, right, they're going to work out this illusion eventually, probably, but it stops them getting to us for a bit, that kind of thing.
Well, in the face of that, my tiny hut seems insignificant, so once again I'm going to give this round to you as well.
Oh, that's very good of you. You are a generous games master, aren't you?
Yeah.
I've always said that.
Yeah. It's because I'm on this little horse.
You're on the little horse, aren't you? In the tiny hut.
I'm feeling insignificant.
With a magic mouth saying, let him win, let him win.
Okay, final round.
Initiative?
Okay. Yeah, so for initiative. I've got 2.
That means I'll roll 1.
You got 3?
Got
Whoa.
3.
Here it goes.
All right. Final spell?
Yes.
Final spell. A little bit more high level this, but polymorph self.
Oh.
Polymorph self.
Now, I know that you've used this
I have
many,
used it, yeah.
many occasions.
I have. Yeah. This is why I need the high horse, isn't it?
Call it in.
Ring the high horse.
Calm
in.
down.
Yeah.
Come on.
No, polymorph self. Again, to go back, there's polymorph other, isn't there? But I'm not so keen on that, because if you use that as an offensive spell, I'll turn the dragon into a frog. Oh, hang on, it's not worked. We're going to have to fight it anywhere. I should have seen if I'd never had the spell. But polymorph self, again, it's going to work because you cast it on yourself.
Yeah.
And again, it just gives you so much kind of scope for doing interesting things. You know, on the one hand, you've got the obvious things like turn yourself into a tiger and get all those extra tiger attacks with claws and stuff like that, and make yourself quite deadly as a magic user. You know, when you're not deadly normally, but you can actually get involved in a fight. Turn yourself into a mouse or a sparrow and go scouting ahead. It's as good as invisibility. You know, if you turn yourself into a mouse, it's as good as invisible, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but it's not invisibility. It's got other uses as well. So it's that kind of great spell. Like the other two, it's got that potential that you've got that in your spell book, and you're playing the game. You think, there's kind of moment in this game where I can turn into something else for whatever reason, and that being something else, another creature, comes with abilities. It comes with flight. It comes with either, you know, being able to fly, or being able to be undetectable, or being huge and dangerous. All those kind of things.
And if you combine it with a fly spell...
Well, yes. Or is it?
Or is it?
Or is it?
So I think this is the high horse moment,
It is
isn't
the high horse moment,
last time we had this new feature. Now, do you want me to set this up for you, or are you okay?
Should I? I'll set it up, I think.
Right, okay.
And I think it comes back to the discussion we were having a minute ago about generous games masters versus...
Psychopaths.
I was going to say mean-spirited, but I think actually you're right. Psychopaths, yes, who won't let you do anything in their game. So let's set the scene. It was a typical opening to one of Kevin's games where we were in a tavern. Suddenly, it all went dark, and it didn't just go dark. It was a darkness spell, so you couldn't see anything.
Or was it a spell? It was
unclear. I think later on it became apparent that it was a darkness
Yeah.
spell, so lighting the torch didn't help. It's kind of almost like blindness, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we were attacked by these figures in the dark that we couldn't see, and it was kind of one of those situations where you thought, there's seems to be no way out of this.
No, because every time we tried to hit, we couldn't hit because we couldn't see them because it was pitch black.
Yeah, but they could hit us because they could see in the dark, obviously.
Even characters that could see in the dark were unable to see in the dark.
I think you took the approach of just standing there and saying, all right, I'm just going to stand here and let him hit me.
Yes.
Which annoyed him. Because it's a bit like saying, you're going to have to kill me then, aren't you? Yeah. You're going to have to take that decision to kill me.
But that didn't matter, did it? Because you came up with a genius idea.
I'd like to think so. It's not a genius. That's for other people to say, isn't it? But it's. But I think now I get in the right order. I cast a fly spell on myself, so I could fly first.
Yeah.
Which lasts for a good hour or so, actually. If you look at the rules, it's so many turns per level, and turns 10 minutes in D&D. Yeah. It's not a combat round, a turn. So you got that for a few hours. And then I decided to cast Polymorph Self. And I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'd recently watched Dumbo. And I decided I'm going to turn myself into the biggest thing that Polymorph Self allows. And that's an elephant. Doesn't allow you to turn yourself into monsters or anything bigger, but an elephant. I thought the biggest thing. And I'm going to fly at the roof, crash through the roof.
Like a battering ram.
Or through a wall or wherever. A battering ram. Get through. That'll let some light in. And it gives us an escape opportunity. I can put people on my back and fly out. You know,
it's going to look impressive.
Impressive in the film. It might look a bit like Dumbo, like a bit like that. But you know, it would save our bacon. Smash a hole in the roof. Come back. You all get on my back, and we fly out to safety. Brilliant. Yeah. But apparently, the games master said that I couldn't get any momentum as a flying elephant. He seemed to be suggesting that I'd turn myself into a balloon. A balloon, not a balloon. I'm a flying elephant. And if I'm a flying elephant, I've got the momentum and the strength of an elephant in flight. And there began, afterwards, an exchange of emails, which I no longer have, sadly.
They're painful.
Which I think in the end he conceded that he was wrong. It was a bit late. It was about a week later, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was. Sounds childish.
We ended up. Well,
sort of is childish.
Because as it happened, we were in the pitch black being hit by these things, and you were floating for all intents.
I was floating like a balloon. I was a balloon.
You're floating.
I had a terrible miscalculation in that I thought I'd turn myself into a huge, great, hulking, flying elephant. What I'd really done is turn myself into a big balloon-shaped, elephant-shaped balloon.
And then, dear listener, we had the problem of getting you out of a pub as an elephant, I think.
Afterwards, yeah. I think the tavern owner objected, didn't allow elephants in normally. He wanted to do, he'd smuggled an elephant in here.
Had a strict rule on elephants.
Very strict rule on pachyderms.
My last spell, we've already covered it. It's enlarge.
Is it?
I went for enlarge,
as well. Right.
Yeah, because I've used enlarge in lots of.
But as enlarge, not
enlarge,
shrink.
not a shrink.
Right, okay.
Just call it an inferiority complex that I've gone for enlarge rather than shrink.
Well, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? You know what? Yeah, enlarge.
Yeah.
So Gary Guy gets given too much away there.
How long does this last?
Not long. Although I don't know, long enough. Perhaps.
Long enough.
Yeah, long enough. 6 rounds. What's a round?
Again, for all the reasons that you've given for the shrink, enlarge is very versatile, and I've used it to kind of throw the stone in front of the door.
Yes,
it turn into a boulder and stop the bad guys getting through.
Yeah.
And there's just sometimes benefits to being bigger, isn't there? If you want to get to high places, there are benefits to getting bigger. Also, it's a useful way, because I'm very practically minded. Again, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow, famous wizard, of course. The hygiene factors. You can clear your gutters out, can't you, without using a ladder?
Yeah, it's useful. Although you'd think that they've invented a clean gutter spell.
Yeah.
Like you said, these magic users, they've invented all these spells for fighting monsters, but most of your day is probably spent at home thinking, should we invent a make a cup of tea spell?
Well, I'm going to give that round to you.
Well, no, I disagree. I think you should have that round.
All right.
Because I think we've picked up on something here. Have we discovered the greatest magic user spell of all? Enlarge. We both picked it.
Yeah,
Enlarge,
independently.
shrink, independently. Yeah, I think maybe I should concede. So
There we
enlarge, and or shrink.
It's the
It's
greatest
the greatest
spell.
magic user spell.
It's a great spell.
The greatest
Indisputable.
Spell. It's indisputable now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't want anyone writing in about that. It's indisputable.
The White Dwarf, Part 3.
Having escaped Moria and bested the halls of Tism Thane, the play should finish with something truly epic. Now, the mention of the word epic, you might think I'll be taking a look at Irillion, Daniel Collerton's 6-part combination of a scenario, The Rising of the Dark, with a complete AD&D town detailed alongside. Confession time. I never really got on with Irillion. I found it a little overwhelming. Maybe it was because its publication coincided with my crisis of confidence around the excess of information I was trying to process on Glorantha, as described in GrogPod Episode 1. Maybe it was because, to my 13-year-old self, having to learn a new calendar, plus a complete new Chaucerian language, just to run an AD&D scenario seemed far too much like homework. Whatever the reason, I never ran it, then or since. So despite the fact I know many people think of it highly, I won't be looking at Aurelian here. Instead, let's tackle Paul Vernon's Troubles at Ember Trees from issue 34. In the 3 prior issues, White Dwarf published a 3-part article series by Paul Vernon called The Town Planner, all about designing and running your own towns and cities in AD&D. I wonder if Daniel Collerton was inspired by this series. This obviously fed into the Troubles at Ember Trees, but in contrast to Aurelian, it never felt to me like there was a lot of required reading about medieval societies before you got to the exciting adventure stuff. Troubles at Ember Trees details a village on a much more manageable scale, and concentrates on the development of an atmospheric setting and a character-driven plot to propel the scenario. Make no mistake, though, there's still a lot of information here. Ember Trees is something of a mini-epic. Despite running to only 5 pages, the details are really packed in, by virtue of White Dwarf's predilection at the time for using a teeny tiny font. For me, the real strength of Troubles at the Ember Trees is the setting. Paul Vernon provides a good deal of information and detail to add colour and bring the location to life, but it stays just on the right side of overwhelming the DM with information. I first read the scenario around the same time as I also read Robert Holstock's Mythago Wood. The woodland setting, together with the druidic villagers and the affinity for the forest, mixed in my mind with the primal and magical Mythago Wood to create a tangible sense of place. It's not a scenario for beginner DM. Paul Vernon presents a dizzying cast of non-player characters, which needs careful managing. The relationships between the villagers are particularly well drawn, from petty jealousies to harbouring darker secrets, to even more dangerous machinations as some plot against each other. Prior to running the scenario for my group, I drew a node map of all the NPC's relationships to enable me to keep track of them all, plus a timeline of the major events in the scenario with branches for the different outcomes depending on players' actions or inaction. Because the village of Ember Trees is beset by multiple threats at once from outside and inside the village, this introduces a novel tactical focus for the players. What problem do they tackle first? Should they divide their resources? I remember my group focused on hunting down the nasties from the outside that were attacking the village, and so took their eye off the ball when it came to the skullduggery between the villages themselves. Again, this is an open scenario that doesn't railroad a specific plot, so there are many ways it can play out. Typically, though, the scenario builds to a climax at the Temple of Pelarn. Paul Vernon again creates a memorable setting, employing some effective symbolism to create an eerie, unsettling mood. Depending on how events have gone earlier in the scenario, there are a number of dramatic encounters that can happen in the temple, with a grandstand finish in a lava-filled cavern, now where I've heard that before, that lives long in my memory. Loved it. So, there you go. 3 great scenarios, all of which stand the test of time. Having played 1 whole session of D&D 5th edition, and maybe 2 by the time you hear this, I feel fully qualified to state that, with a bit of tweaking, each of these scenarios would work well with the latest rules. Just realised though, the most recent of these scenarios was published in February 1983. What can I say? I'm a grognard. Next time, the monsters.
Pulse bag.
The phrase icon gets overused in this modern age, but the player's handbook is up there with the icons of popular culture in the 20th century, like Madonna's conical bra, for instance. Next time we'll be looking at the monster manual, and at Daily Dwarf we'll be selecting the best monsters from the pages of White Dwarf. Also, we'll be opening the box on D&D 5th edition, as we'll have played it 3 times by then, at both low level and at higher level. I've been impressed by the amount of correspondence that we've received following the first part of this episode. As I said earlier, all role players have a relationship with D&D in one form or another, so the postwoman has been over-encumbered when tromping up the steps to Dirk Towers. Thankfully, I've been storing them in my bundle of holding. I'm on Twitter, my preferred social media channel, at the Grognard File, and you'll catch at Daily Dwarf there too. This is a comment from Ian Brumby, and it came via the comment section on thegrognardfiles.com. We started out with the red box version after a schoolmate, Mark, bought a copy of B1, In Search of the Unknown, and he sat next to me on the school bus and asked me if I had any idea what it was. Some kind of weird story with loads of numbers, but with orcs and monsters, like The Hobbit. Over the course of a week in 1978, we finally figured out that we needed rules to go with it and tracked down a copy of D&D Basic from the multi-purpose games / twee craft shop at the top of an appropriately named steep hill in Lincoln. I think it must have been right on the cusp of a half-term or a long weekend, as I seem to recall continuous days spent charging through dungeons with a party of characters with the name of Bid, Bod and Bert. Very imaginative. One of our first encounters was a single one-hit dice skeleton, and as fresh initiates to the Harryhausen Argonauts experience, the correct response to an animated skelly was, of course, "Run away!" Despite the fact Mark was desperately trying to reassure us that we could comfortably beat the nasty and thus be able to go further than just the first room of the dungeon. Somewhere along the way, I got hold of a copy of both the Player's Handbook and Monster Manual for AD&D, and for whatever reason, it was decided that I'd take over the dungeon mastering duties. After Mark's long-suffering parents bought him a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide for Christmas, failing to appreciate the Prime Directive's insistence that he couldn't even open their gift because he wasn't a dungeon master, there was no stopping us, and the following 8 years or so was spent pretty much solidly role-playing anything and everything we could get our grubby mitts on. Thanks for that, Ian. Although what you should be doing is continuing your sculpting work on the miniatures for the forthcoming God's War from Peterson Games, an epic Gloranthan board game. So get back to work. There's been loads of comments and emails to dirtthedice@gmail.com. Keep them coming, because I'm going to bring them all together for an extra at the end of the D&D episode, which will also include an interview with listeners Rick and Tim from the Old Scroats RPG Club in Southport. In November, we'll be hosting the first ever Grog Meet in Manchester. There's going to be games of RuneQuest, Stormbringer, Gangbusters, and the West End edition of Star Wars, and Actung Cthulhu. At the meetup, we'll be launching the Grognard Files fanzine. And all these projects have been possible with the support of Patreons. And we're tantalisingly close to unleashing the next goal to run online games every 6 months. For details and how to find out how to participate to the Patreon, please go to thegrognardfiles.com. New honorary members to the Armchair Adventurers are Chris McNeil, Andrew Cowie and Shannon Ferguson. Welcome, guys. New at the $3.50 level are Carl Clare and an upgrade from Rick Knott. Cheers. We look forward to sending you a hard copy of the zine when it comes out. We have 2 new patrons at the $5 level, so I'm going to award them with a magical gift from the Dungeon Master's Guide. I'm going to need a dice here. Okay, this time I've gone for Table 99. Girdles, Hats and Helms. Nigel Holloway? Okay, 19. You've got a helm of underwater action. And once again, fun at bath times. Thanks, Nigel. Andrew Cousins, who's increased the number of coins in the beret this month. You've got 13. A helm of comprehending languages and reading magic, which will come in handy in Japan. Thanks, Andrew. Finally, a shout out to the Rollist podcast. Check out the link in the show notes. Callum has hosted a foodie special that includes a Walktopus contribution from me. So, that's the end of another bumper issue. Please get in touch with your comments or suggestions, or bung a quick review on iTunes. I'm dirtthedice@gmail.com. Until next time, adios amigos.